And should I introduce myself?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
And forget that I'm here. There's a whole world audience watching you now. You're
Oh,
telling
no.
the world about.
Don't tell people that. That makes them nervous. Okay, you tell me when.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, my name is Judy Kelly, and I was invited here to come speak on the request of my friend Will. I first met Will at the end of this past year because I was working on a retail store that we're opening down in Ogden, Utah, and we were getting up close to a deadline, and Will and his team showed up kind of out of nowhere. It was a great surprise to us. And Will was all business. He showed up and got his team on task and really got him working hard. And he stayed all on business the entire time. Little coarse around the edges, maybe even, but we so appreciated having them there. And so he had to come back, I recall, shortly after we opened finally. And he was asking me about the candle making, and I noticed he had a Valley Camp sweatshirt on. So we got talking, and I started sharing my story that I had started the candle making as far back as 2007 because I had lost my middle son when he was 25 years old due to a heroin overdose. And the candle making to me was a way to just honor his very creative side, his loving side. I started a store then in 2007 called Pure Light Candle Studios down in Southern California. And it was a way where people could come in and bring in choose fragrances that evoked memories to them, colors, all kinds of different memory tokens and that type of thing. And as the story got out there, more people were coming, part to kind of see what does that look like when a mom loses a child. She's bold enough to get out there in the world and share her story. It was in the newspapers and that type of thing. And when I shared that it was a way to light a candle for someone you love, build something in their honor, we had a lot of recovery centers actually coming down and starting to make candles. And the idea was you would light the candle when you needed to turn to the light or feel good or meditate on something. And so that was how the candle making got started. And as I was sharing that story about my son, this kid who had this Jim Carrey type of wit and humor, he was a top athlete. He was a chef who could beat out any chef I ever had the privilege to eat with. And his presentation was amazing. And he was a rock star musician. He wrote his own music. At one point, I put all his music together on a CD, and one of the band members from Chicago got his hands on it and actually wanted to promote his music. So I was very pleased and impressed with it. It was kind of fun to hear that other people loved it as much as I did. But right there in front of my own eyes, I watched Will turn from this all business guy to this man of incredible heartfelt compassion for my story. And suddenly I think he saw me in a different light too. And the Valley Camp sweatshirt just kind of tied it all up in a great knot for me. So shortly after that, Will asked me if I would be willing to speak here, as I am today, about being a survivor. And when he said that to me, I really had to think about that term because I really don't consider myself to be a survivor. I've heard for a long time that people would say to me, a parent should not lose their child. It's not in logical order. It's not the way that the world turns. It really shouldn't have to be that way. And it truly was the most horrific thing that has ever happened to me in my life. I agree. It is horrible. However, over the years, it's been 14 years since I've lost him. There's only one other story that I'll share in a minute that comes close to that. So where I found myself was in a place of tremendous grief. I was afraid. I didn't know how to cope with it really. I didn't have any experience in that kind of loss. I didn't have anyone really to turn to. But there was this small light that kind of continued to prevail. And I think as I thought about that word survivor, I think what happened for me is I just needed some kind of cushion to land on, because it took me years to get to a place where I was even willing to push through my grief and my sadness and my loss. And it cost me dearly in a lot of ways. One of the side effects that I think people don't realize happens when they cross over and leave all of us behind. So what I did is I started justifying. I started realizing and saying to myself, well, you know, I can't be going through the worst thing, because what about the parent that loses their child to cancer? Or what about the parent who loses their child in a car accident that was no fault of anyone else's? I had a friend that I came to meet during this journey of loss that actually lost her 18-year-old son to a rock climbing accident. What does that feel like? There was no, how would you ever think that your child, who's a healthy, athletic type person, was going to one day not come home? So the shock of that was something I tried to deal with, and continued to just say that, you know, I have to push on, because other people do have it worse. Maybe, you know, maybe it's not the loss of a child. So I buried myself in my new studio that honored him. This was part of my cushion. I called the candle studio Pure Light, because Ty was my pure light. And I ended up canceling or calling off my engagement to who is now my husband. It took me a year, but we had been together 7 years and were engaged to be married. And when that happened, that ended for me. I learned over time, to the dismay of my children, that I buried myself in ways to keep me busy. And they felt like I had kind of let them down, which was awful. During that time, a lot of awful emotions showed up for me. Of course, if you've been through any kind of program, you know there's the anger and the hurt and the fear and the blame and all those things. And of course, they all show up with this. I blamed Ty for making the choices he had. I felt hurt for being left behind. I was afraid I was going to forget his face. That just, I know I had photographs, but we all know there's nothing like seeing someone you love. Just the sadness that I'd never hear his voice again, or that I'd know how he was as a parent. Tough stuff. Sorry, but that's just kind of part of it. You know, here it is 14 years later, and when you bring these things up again, it's just a constant. It is. And some days are better, definitely. As time goes on, it has its moments that are wonderful in memories, and then it has its moments in brokenness. So it's something that I wish I could convey to the people. For example, my nephew, he ended up deciding that he was going to try heroin after my son passed away, because he just couldn't understand how my son could have continued down the path for the years that he did. And so he gave it a try, and as a result, he has now been an addict for 14 years, and I think we've lived through at least 5 or 6 overdoses, and it's just not a great place to be living. So it really does impact people in so many ways. Kids with curiosity, parents who are left behind, brothers and sisters, all of them. Then 5 days after Ty passed on, the morning of his funeral, I had an attack where my heart started racing to where it got up to over 300 beats a minute, and I had no blood pressure. Our next door neighbor was an emergency room nurse, and she came over and had one of the cuffs. Couldn't even get a blood pressure on me. So I was rushed to the hospital, and it turned out that I had what's called SVT. I can't say what that means, but it's a pretty somewhat standard thing. But literally it meant the electric currents that go between chambers had broken. And so ironically, here I am, I don't mind saying I was somebody who never did drugs. I'm a goody good. I was a cheerleader. It was just kind of my thing. I'm not better than anybody else, but it just never was my thing. But here I ended up with 3 boys who experimented in drugs, one who died from it, 2 who one who came quite close, a lot of times in rehab. And another guy, my youngest one, had his moments too. But here I was sentenced to the life of a broken heart drug. Every single morning I have to take a pill to help my heart. And I was told that came about by the stress and the dehydration that comes from crying so much and all the things that come with it. So it has its ongoing side effects. And then earlier I had mentioned a story equal to the sadness of the loss of my son was on the day of Tyson's funeral. We learned from his girlfriend that she was going to have a baby, that she was pregnant with Tyson's baby. She had just found out that morning. So we were with her through the entire pregnancy, but get this, that baby arrived 3 weeks early from its due date on my youngest son, whose name is Shane, on my youngest son's birthday. And my son Shane was the one who found his brother Tyson when he passed away. And I said to him that day when baby Ty arrived, she named him after him. Tyson Lyric was the middle name she gave him. But I said to my son Shane, I go, my goodness, if this isn't a gift from Tyson, I don't know what is. For him to arrive on your birthday is quite a message to me. And this little guy is the spitting image of his father. He has the same humor. And we were able to spend the first 6 years of his life together. We did weekly Skype calls. She moved down to Texas, where her family was from. And we visited every couple of months. We took trips. We took him on trips with us. We went down to see him. Then she met another gentleman and decided to circle the wagons. And without a word, we lost him. And we haven't seen him now since he was 6 years old. So the purpose in telling you this story is how the dominoes kind of keep falling. It's one thing to have lost my son, then to have this miracle child show up who is the spitting image of my son and have so much joy with him, and then to have him just gone again. And we did try through the courts to see if we could get some grandparent rights to be able to see him. And it turned out the very month before we went to court, a new law had passed. I believe it's called Jones versus Jones, and it took away all grandparents' rights as long as there's a surviving parent. So he is now 13 years old, and we haven't been able to see him. So that's a sadness that we live with, but we live with the hope that we will see him again, and we'll find a way to communicate. And I'm really looking forward to that day. I can't wait to see what he looks like. I can't wait to tell him about his dad. I don't even know that he knows that my son is his dad. He didn't at 6 years old. They hadn't told him yet. So that's just one of those little side stories. So I wanted to share also that one of the things, some people may, others may not believe in this, but I've come to believe you've got to find the ways to help yourself through things like this. And what's been helpful to me is being very open to the fact that I do believe that my son Tyson does communicate from the other side with me. That might be getting a little esoteric for people, but it's pretty magical if you allow yourself to be open to it. There's nothing evil about it or horrible. It's just something that maybe it's wishful thinking on my part, but there's just been way too many experiences that don't let me believe that. And it's given me a tremendous comfort to be open to them. One example is, I think I mentioned his music earlier. What had happened is he had recorded all of his music in my living room, and he was a tremendous songwriter. He writes all his own music. And we had found a lot of it on CDs, or not CDs, what are they, those little cassette recorders. And so I gathered it all together and I sent it to someone who could kind of string it all together. And they actually took some of his words, because he would talk in some of the recordings, and they pieced it all together beautifully, I thought. So the day it arrived, I had been working in my shop, Pure Light, and I never left the store. I was always in there working. And the music had arrived, and so I thought, I want to go listen to this. I'll go jump in my car and run an errand. So I drive to where I was going. The CD was in, and one of his songs that I love, called Stars Will Be Coming Out Tonight, came on. So I leaned back, and right when he was singing Stars Will Be Coming Out Tonight, they are all on stage for us, a million little rainbows appeared all over the dashboard. Now, what was so amazing about that is the day before, a friend of mine, I think I mentioned, who had lost her son, she actually wrote a book about communicating from the other side with people that you've lost. And she was telling the story about how oftentimes they'll show up in the way of rainbows or butterflies or bees. That's kind of common. Some people love dragonflies. And so I was standing in the back of the room listening to her give this talk, this book signing she was doing. And I said in my mind, Tyson, you never send me rainbows. What's up with that? I always see, your dad sees bees, and I've seen a couple dragonflies, but you've never sent me a rainbow. So for the very next day when his music arrived, to have all those little rainbows show up like little tiny stars was just magical. Another time, it was the day he had died, and we had a little porch, and I sat out in a chair. I could look out. I lived in California at that time, and we were down by the beach in Laguna Beach, and I could look out to the ocean, and I sat in a chair all night long, all night, and I could hear him talking, and he was laughing at himself. And I could hear him. He used to always shake his head and go, "Oh my God, you're stupid," and he would just kind of laugh at himself. And I could hear that. And I opened my eyes, and there in front of me was this whole silhouette of a tree. And it was just shaking like it was laughing. And it was, in a strange way, very comforting. It was really just kind of one of those magical moments. Another time, I got a wake-up call, I guess you could say, because I woke up feeling like he was hugging me. I could actually smell his t-shirt. And so I said to Tyson, I could feel him, and he said, "Mom, go to the beach." I could hear this in my head. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna go on down to the beach. So right when I stepped onto the beach, I usually always turn left, and he said, "Go right, Mom, go right." And I went down to the beach, and it's called Shell Beach because it's always littered with shells. The entire beach was wiped completely clean, and there were 10 or 15, probably 15 heart-shaped mussel shells that were opened up in the form of kind of footprints going all the way down to the beach. When I got to the end, there inside one of the shells was a baby mussel opened in a heart inside the other one. And it was when we were, the baby had just been born. So lots of really great stories that I found by being open to it. I mentioned about Ty's CD. What I did is I took his music, recorded it, made a CD, and one of the things that happened in Pure Light is a gentleman asked me, his name's Brent Huff, he works in Hollywood, and he was putting together a movie called Behind the Orange Curtain. I highly recommend it. And it was his effort to try and help educate people, parents in particular, who don't understand what their kids are doing. So we created the Lyric Foundation, and we're able to donate quite a bit of money from the sale of my son's CD, which I was really happy about. And Pure Light kind of spoke to the overdose epidemic that was really starting up at that time. A lot of people showed up at Pure Light to say, what does a surviving mom look like? What is this about? We did a lot of ceremonies and blessings and made lots of candles. But then I moved to Utah. After being open almost 9 years there, I'd opened 7 locations. I just decided we were ready to, our life had changed a bit, and we had found this property here in Utah, and we decided this would probably be a good place to go. And Pure Light had kind of run its course. It had turned to a place of celebration, which I was delighted and proud about. A lot of people were celebrating just being able to gather together. So that was a wonderful closure to me. But I found the strength of the mountains and making the conscious choice not to run away, but to look and face fear and grief in the face was important. So I spent a couple years here in the mountains and really found a lot of strength by being here. I ended up partnering with a girlfriend and opened up this candle studio that brings me back around full circle to how I met Will. And it was also the place where I met an amazing young man from the Valley Camp. He's on the board up there. And I became super impressed by his strength and his honesty. And during this healing time I was taking, I was amazed at what I learned from him and what was happening up at the camp. And so my son and I, my older son, we took the candle making up there, and Tyson visited once again. When I was asked to share my story, as I did, a very large photograph on the back wall fell to the ground, and everybody turned around and could hardly believe it when I was starting to speak about my son Tyson. And I turned to the back and I said, well, gentlemen, please meet Tyson. Everyone turned and said, hey, Ty, how are you? And it was really wonderful to see everybody embrace him. So I enjoyed my time talking with this gentleman. We have become fast friends. He shared with me his story that he wished his mom could have met me because he thinks I could have encouraged her to maybe have done something of strength that wouldn't have ended. She ended up passing away, and that's been a challenge for him, he shared, as it would be for anyone to lose their mom. And I was very touched by the fact he felt that way. And he thought that maybe it could have created a different outcome to have seen somebody who could have been encouraging. So these have helped me to see my truth, that I finally realized, while I will always feel the same way I do about the loss of him for the rest of my life, it will never go away. But I finally came to believe that Ty was blinded to the choices drugs were helping him to make on his behalf. And overcoming that was his downfall. And I realized that Ty's life was not mine to live. And he made the choices he made because those were his life choices. And only he could make a choice to do something different. If he wanted to live a healthy, happy life, he had to do that. And no amount of taking him to rehab centers or helping him go through withdrawals, which I did twice, was going to make a difference. So I've embraced my life to realize I'm just one of the lucky ones to have been his mom and to have had him. So I hope you all can find some love and laughter in any tragedy that comes in your life, because there are lots of different sides to a story. And my story kind of gets a little bit busy and complicated, but it involves a lot of love and a lot of joy if you look at the right side. So that's my story. How was